Hey, it's Michael Sapersky here, and what you're about to listen to is a past interview that I think you'll enjoy.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast with your host, Michael Sapersky, where we take you deep into the world of elite consultants.
Today on the show, we have Steve Shu with us. Steve is a management consultant who has worked and consulted for Vodafone, Allianz, Nortel, Lucent and Wolters Kluwer, to name a few. He's also taught courses in the business school at Irvine University. Steve, a big welcome to you.
Thank you very much for having me, Michael.
Yeah, so let's start by having you tell us what it is that you're doing for clients these days.
Okay, great. Typically, what I do is I help incubate technology-oriented startup initiatives within other companies. And, this typically includes things like new business units, innovation areas, new product development, and I also do some pure startups, but it's typically kind of startup initiatives within larger companies.
Can you give us a bit of if we were to take that idea and break it down a little bit so people can get a bit of a better picture into exactly what it is you're doing? Could we just play off maybe a recent project example or one that you're comfortable sharing of kind of
Sure.
what you did?
So one of the clients that I worked for recently was involved with starting up, they wanted to start up a new business unit. They wanted to move into an adjacent market space, leveraging their current software products. And so I got involved early on with helping them kind of define the business and also secure the funding from, at the CEO level to kind of invest in developing the business unit. So we started off with kind of the funding and the strategy for the business. Then we went into things like the planning and the incubation and acquisition of new clients and kind of staffing the organization. So that's a somewhat long process. The funding efforts can take, a few months to a half year, and then we kind of go through kind of the incubation phases of getting those business started.
Right. Okay. Well, that definitely, I think, gives people a better picture into what you're doing and, kind of what level you're at. You also told me that, many of your projects for clients can be $100,000 and more. What does, $100,000 or $200,000 project look like for you? Is it just kind of what you described, or is it typically something different?
Yeah, it's usually, so those projects are usually broken into phases. So the funding project, might, be just a self-contained project. And, sometimes the decisions don't get made that rapidly, or sometimes you have to kind of align with the fiscal year of the company that you're working for. So sometimes they usually be, broken into pieces where, the first piece is kind of just getting the funding piece. And then the second piece might be another project, which is really around kind of getting organized and, developing the service offerings or the development, and then starting the prospecting phase, if you will, with new clients or new partners, customers or partners. And then finally, the latter phases are really kind of scaling that up and incubating it out. So that's pretty much
right. Yeah, and so, when you typically are going and working with a client, and we can kind of just play with the same example, for the purpose of this interview right now, but when you're going in and working with a client, do they typically have very clear ideas around, what it is that they're looking to do with regards to funding? Do they have kind of a structure, a process that you need to work within, or are you coming in and they really have typically no real clear idea of how to move forward, and so they're counting on you to bring all of, kind of your process and structure that you developed over the years and working with other clients into their business, or, are you kind of working with what they have?
Yeah, I would say that typically the process is that I have to bring in some structure that here's kind of what the business planning should look like. We may leverage pieces of what they do in the rest of the business. Sometimes those structures, though, are a little bit bulky for kind of a startup initiative, with, lots of approval boards and very extensive financial modeling and things like that. And, that's not really that conducive for kind of a startup thing. So, it's a little bit more tailored to be, leaner, if you will. So I think it's a negotiated thing, but I would say that most companies probably do not have kind of, how do they do these kinds of startup things within companies?
Right. Okay. And then, as you're mentioning this, and I'm thinking you're talking about, $100,000, $200,000 projects. I know you mentioned you can do several of those a year, although you're kind of trying to scale back a little bit right now. I know you mentioned to me, but when you're discussing with clients on a project of that size, what is it kind of that you're really selling to that client, that prospective client? I mean, where are you focusing to be able to win a project of that size? Is it your process? Is it, what would you say that it is?
So I think there's two pieces. One is that you kind of have to sell the end vision. What could this business be, roughly speaking? And we may not know in advance, but we may have some rough idea. So I think you have to sell kind of the outcome of kind of this life cycle. Let's say it takes at least 6 months, goes to a few years. You have to kind of sell the bigger picture, but you usually also have to start with a starter engagement. So it might be a workshop, for example, that I start off with this kind of strategy development. And in that case, we might build very, specific structure for the workshop where we gather a lot of competitive intelligence. We interview a bunch of folks kind of one-on-one. We bring on outside research perspectives, and then we kind of organize that all in a workshop where kind of the senior management can get together and say, kind of debate the pros and the cons and the positioning and the relative risk that folks are willing to take. So it usually starts off that way with kind of a smaller step, if you will.
Yeah, no, and that's great. That's kind of a strategy that I've talked about and shared with others, but I really like this example and seeing how you're making this work. So typically that workshop would be investment wise for the company might be what? Is that a $5,000 engagement, a $10,000 type of workshop? Is it $20,000? Is there kind of a range that you go in?
I'll work with various levels, but I would say that in order to get it kind of quickly through the door, probably starting anywhere from the $10,000 to $40,000 is probably easier. Otherwise, you start getting into the 100,000 levels. You have various levels, more levels of approval here. So
sure, and so that might be a one-time workshop.
Yeah, usually
for $40,000
more like a one-time workshop. There's probably some follow-on efforts too, where there's a lot of prep. There's conducting the workshop. There's individual follow-ups, and you might have some specific things like rough financial modeling just to kind of move the discussion forward. And you've made a small investment to help advance everyone's understanding of what the possibilities could be, and then you kind of work into this kind of larger engagement, if you will.
Right. I'm glad that you clarified that. It's, you're not just showing up for a workshop with a whiteboard and saying, okay, I've, charged you $40,000. Let's chat, right? You've given.
No, chat is pretty much free. That's not, I mean, you have to actually do some work behind the scenes to get these, kind of these sessions to work right. There's actually a lot more work on the prep and the follow-up than actually in the session itself.
Right. It's good. I mean, just to give people a perspective, because some people that are listening to this, will be new to consulting and might hear, oh yeah, workshops are great. Make $20,000-$30,000, just a one-day quick little workshop, and go sit on the beach. And so it's obviously that's not the way that it works. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. But what I think is good though that you just kind of talked about is the process of working with clients, because clearly when you're speaking with a brand new client, someone you really haven't worked with before, rather than jumping right into a much larger engagement and project, the $100,000, $200,000 or more, you're easing people in. And so really you're kind of removing or lowering the barrier to entry, right?
Correct.
You're getting them comfortable, your clients comfortable with an offering that is easy for them to manage investment wise. And then, I would imagine that, in those you work really hard to make sure that you're demonstrating the value that you can bring, so that then after that, because that's kind of the hardest part, is to get your clients' trust. And once you've built that up through the workshop, do you find it a much easier sell to then, go to a larger engagement after
that? I mean, usually it is. I mean, by that time you kind of made some investment. The company sort of has their initial temperature, and they definitely want to investigate usually, or kill things as well. But often they're willing to kind of go to the next stage, and that includes not only committing, resources like myself, but committing other resources in the organization to look at things.
Right. And so would you also, be interested in doing workshops if you knew they were just one-time things and there was no real potential of them moving forward? Would you even, be open to those? Are you really looking for clients where you can see, okay, I'm going to do this workshop. I'm going to, obviously, I'm going to be compensated fairly for my time and investment and the value that I bring, but I'm doing it because I see that there's a lot more coming down the road with this client. How do you?
Yeah, I try to think about it as kind of the longer term piece, because the sales process and the marketing and investment process is a very, requires a lot of work. And so I definitely prefer to kind of have those longer engagements. I do favors, generally when I know someone well, I might do these smaller engagements kind of one-off, just help them through kind of a quick hurdle, and I'll do those as well. Lately I have not been doing them as much. I guess there's another kind of interesting aspect to the model, but I've moved around quite a bit in terms of geography. And so sometimes in order to kind of get myself used to the market, because I don't have, I might not have any contacts in the area or in the geography, you might have to do some of these kinds of, get to know you kinds of things, if you will.
Right. Okay. No, that makes good sense. So when it comes to setting your fees for projects, whether it's a workshop where you're charging, a range of 10 to 40,000 or a larger project with some phases in it where, it could be $100,000 or more. How have you figured out over the years to charge? How do you arrive at those amounts?
Yeah, it's kind of a black art, but I usually come at it through a few ways. One is, I have an idea of what the trajectory of the business is, and so you can kind of look at, what is the potential outcome for getting this business successful and being kind of one of the early folks in kind of incubating it. And so you'll kind of like look at the value, if you will. But you also, I find that, there are a number of, kind of conventions, if you will, that also people see in terms of, workshop. What is a typical workshop, if you will? Or, what is the typical spending level? So it's a bit of it's a craft, but I usually like to start with the outcomes piece. And I tend to, it's kind of a balance here, right? You want to get in the door. So you want to start smaller. But I would say that I try and price those earlier engagements, a little bit more on the value, because as you get farther, especially in this business that I'm in, which is more startups, as you get longer into the business and the business is already running and you may be transitioning out as a consultant, they're looking you more as, contracted labor, if you will, as opposed to, and it's harder to kind of, command kind of those larger, returns, if you will.
So what you're saying is you try and start off focusing more on the value side, so that way you're not locking yourself in, by starting with an hourly, because that's then you will get locked in down the road. Or are you saying that, just kind of clarify that piece. I didn't really understand what you meant.
I think always you should try and shoot for value. So I think that's definitely, rather than the hourly rate type model. Yep. But I would say that as the time progresses and you're working with the client longer, so some of these clients have worked for a few years, right? They come down in value a little bit, right? Because there's other people that are in the organization. And so unless you're kind of moving on to a new piece within there, they're gonna start dragging you down a little bit, right? They're gonna look negotiate for more competitive rates and those kinds of things.
Right. And have you tried to move in those types of situations from, a project-based fee into a retainer type of structure?
Yes.
Have you ever?
Yeah. So project structure, then more to a retainer structure. And then it then kind of falls off. Then I might have to, go to an hourly kind of schedule, if you will. But, try and hold that up more to a retainer schedule, if you will.
Okay, great. So Steve, why did you decide to go after larger companies? I know you mentioned startups, which is, typically a very small company, unless it's a startup within a larger company. Is that what you meant? Are you actually working at all with kind of the true genuine, bootstrap startups that are just getting going? When you said startup, did you mean, startups, but still within larger organizations?
So it's both types. I typically focus on the larger companies. So, I would say the sweet spot customer is probably in the 200 million to, maybe 1 or $2 billion in revenue. That type of company is kind of where I have most of my client base, but I do kind of the pure startups, either the bootstrap or angel funded types of, startup initiatives as well. But I would say that, that in that kind of arrangement, they have less money, if you will, right? And so, it'll be a mix of usually, cash and, some sort of equity or options, if you will.
Right. So I can understand, clearly you can make more money, or the potential for it, in most cases, unless you're working with the next Twitter or Facebook or, Instagram or whatever, and you happen to own some stock and, and make a killing. But other than that, aside from kind of the money aspect of it, did you choose, was that the driving force behind why you decided to focus on working with larger companies typically, or were there other reasons for you in making that decision?
I think it has to do a lot with sort of my appetite. I really like the dynamic, kind of creative, innovative process with startup situations, and it requires a fairly broad skill set, if you will. So, you involve some finance, you involve some, knowledge of legal. You have to have some strategy background, but you also have some specialist skills in terms of either, acquiring customers or negotiating with customers or whatever it is. And so I do like kind of the variety. I would say that's probably, one of the major driving factors. I think people also kind of view my technology background and business background as kind of very suited for that as well. So I think both of those things align quite a bit.
Okay, because it's interesting, on one side, you've worked with, companies that are, like you're saying, sweet spot is 200 million to $1 billion or $2 billion. And on the other side, you have the kind of the pure play startups that are just really getting going. Some I would imagine are pre-revenue or just, kind of getting revenue going a little bit. And so typically, those are quite different markets, and the resources that are available in each of those groups are considerably different. So how do you find it working? Has that been a benefit to you, or has that been a disadvantage when you're going to, to sell your services and to win more business? Whether it's with the smaller startup or a larger organization, has it been a benefit to have, those kind of polarizing experiences in some ways, or have you found that it works out for you?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
I think it works out pretty well. I would say that I've had to change the balance from time to time. And so, one of the things, for example, with the large companies, they typically, that are looking for these startups, I think they've been attracted to my kind of background in working with kind of the pure startups, both as a consultant and kind of, as an operating manager, because you're not just like a consultant, you've kind of done that as well. So, I think they see value there. I think that when you go after the smaller companies and I think that they're kind of attracted to the kind of the knowledge of the working with the larger companies, but that doesn't count so much in the startups. It's really, getting things done in kind of the startups is what they really like. And so, a lot of those opportunities in the startup space, I actually got, involved with based on, relationships that I had with past managers, senior managers, or angels that became investors, that type of thing. And so that's really something that I have done kind of without a lot of marketing, if you will. It's more kind of networking, right. And, it's a process of, just they're trying, it's a very special fit, I would say.
Sure. So kind of on that note, one strategy that you mentioned that's worked well for you, especially kind of in your earlier years, was aligning yourself with other, service providers and kind of creating strategic, relationships. Can you give us a bit more insight into, why and how you did this?
So I think the why is, so when you're practicing consulting, they've always had this issue with when you're selling, you're not delivering. When you're delivering, you're not selling. And so by partnering with other folks, you kind of stabilize things a little bit more. You can get referrals through the people that you network with. You can also kind of work delivery issues when you're trying to sell something, and then you got to figure out how we can deliver. So some of the partnerships that I've done since I work kind of in the technology space are really around kind of like the incubation phase, where there may be some initial product development and requirements specification and prototyping. And so I develop relationships with those that are, technology analysts, or they're kind of digital branding type companies, and they kind of assist with that piece of the process, if you will. So, right. I think I think it really comes down to sales and delivery. So, and then since a lot of these startup initiatives are not, it's not like people publish in the newspaper, we're starting up a new kind of division. You have to rely on the network a little bit to, get an idea where these opportunities might be, if you will.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so the way that you would approach that, or the way that you would recommend that people approach that, would that be to kind of think about, if you're targeting, let's say in this case, startup companies, think about what types of services and products might startup companies need, and then try and align yourself with those specific providers?
I think that's a good way to do it. I think that, okay. You really have to think about what is it that you're offering. And then you're going to have kind of that real credible story. And you might kind of build it in flight a little bit. Because for example, when I, moved to Texas for the first time and I had no contacts, I had no idea what the companies were in the Texas area, I had to basically network around a lot, get a feel for the market, and, figure out how we might be able to help each other on various, projects that were in process or project prospects.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a great approach. If you can add value, and, you can't do everything yourself. So why not, connect with others that can, complement the kind of your offerings, yep. and vice versa. So Steve, you got started, at a large traditional consulting firm. Then you moved to working on a startup, company yourself, with others. And then after that, you went on, out on your own. So my question is, why did you decide to become an independent consultant? Why not just kind of stay within the traditional consulting world where, pay can usually be fairly good. You get to, travel the world and have a nice little expense tab and yep. and so on, and or the startup world where it's very high paced, but you're working with a bunch of people. You could be the next $1 billion company, but instead you decide, okay, I'm gonna go out on my own and become a consultant. So why do you choose?
So I think one aspect was that, again, I had a real appetite for working with kind of startup situations, and I would say that, when you work for a larger consulting firm, you don't always get the fortune of kind of working in those environments. And so I really wanted to be involved in kind of controlling which companies that I worked with, and the types of engagements. Right. And also, important to me at the time was geography as well. I'm married to an academic. until my wife is kind of tenured. You can move around all the time. So I wanted to have kind of a structure where I could move around a lot and also control kind of where I was at. So I think those were the two biggest factors that kind of, shaped kind of going out on my own, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. That makes good sense. Let's get into today's action bite. And you mentioned that you're going to share, some thoughts on, and tips for other consultants on making investments. And maybe these are investments that people may not have thought of before. And, typically that word triggers thinking about financial investments. But when you're going to kind of talk about this, you're actually talking a little bit more about, it can involve financial as well, but knowledge investments. And as a consultant, I think this is a really important area. And so I'm looking forward to kind of hearing, what you can share on this.
So yes, the area that I was thinking about talking about was around, making investments, and that they are the intellectual capital type of things. And so as a consultant, I think, unless if you want to have sort of like market stability and the markets change, people's needs change, you have to kind of invest in intellectual capital. And so, every few years, if you will, I try and invest a little bit of my time in a particular area. So the past 3 or 5 years, for example, I've been investing in the areas of design thinking as well as behavioral economics, which is an area that kind of combines psychology with other disciplines like marketing, finance, and policy and things like that. And so, I think the investment comes in both areas of kind of explicit information, such as books, articles, academic papers, but also getting involved with kind of tacit things like networking and, kind of applying the knowledge and then forming one's own models. And then, if you get to a point where you need to like actually do that on a project. So typically I would take new ideas and, the best way to kind of test these things and to get them introduced would be to kind of find a way to incubate it within the current client. Because these clients have, trust with you, working with you. You don't have to kind of market it as a new thing, but it's kind of this other area that you might be working on. So, that's sort of the conceptual aspect of making the investments. And I think it's very important for consultants to make, significant investment in kind of thought leadership or development because, markets are changing all the time.
So Steve, let me ask you, I think, it's a great point, and one that I think probably not enough consultants really consider. Let me start by asking you, why? Why should people really make an investment if they've been in a specific area, and they're kind of comfortable with it? What's the reason that every, 3 to 5 years they should kind of consider, making a new investment?
Well, so I think, for me, it's definitely in terms of, interest and appetite. I think that's a good thing. But I think that, a lot of offerings, they end up becoming stale over time. So for example, if you think about, mobile technology, if you will, and, the prevalent use of mobile applications. This wasn't here like 5 years ago. You got to kind of get early on in understanding what are all the possible things that people are doing with mobile technology and how they're, what are some of the new applications of that? What are some of the new, of fabric that people are weaving together applications. And so I think, you have to get used to kind of these new shifts. So, I think 10 years is too long, if you will. And, I think for you to develop some sort of expertise, it's not going to come in a year. It's going to be a long enough process where you're going to have just getting some understanding of an area and then, figuring out how you're going to apply it and then really kind of taking it to the next level. Right.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So, I'm a big believer that consultants should really focus and, build up their specialization, not just for themselves to become experts, but for the market to see them as authorities, so they can really build their thought leadership, status. And, it makes the whole kind of marketing piece more interesting and allows them to really stand out from the competition and become more confident and competent.
And just to make just to interrupt you for a second, I mean, just one point. I don't necessarily recommend like going into a totally unknown area, if you will. I would, base it on sort of where you are right now. What portfolio do you have? I was doing a lot of strategy development. And so we're seeing inklings of design thinking really becoming kind of permeating kind of the strategy space. And so to stay ahead of that curve, I don't know when Blue Ocean Strategy came out, but it was much after like Michael Porter's kind of competitive strategy frameworks. Design thinking started to permeate. Right. So you want to get a little bit ahead of the curve, if you will. And so it's not like a totally new area. It's around kind of where you see the center of gravity for kind of a new thinking in like your existing space.
Okay, no, that's perfect, because that was my next question is, how should people choose where to make their investment? And so, you're saying, it's, if you've been focusing really on mobile, or let's say before you're focusing on web applications and cloud, kind of software as a service types of applications, and you saw on the horizon the mobile was going to be big, then that's connected enough, kind of around, your core area of expertise. And so it would have made sense at that point to make an investment into understanding mobile and then how that affects your clients in the marketplace. Whereas you wouldn't necessarily be in software as a service, and then decide, okay, I'm going to start studying now about, productivity might be a good one, but maybe, you wouldn't start studying about colors or how that, influences brands. Like that would be something that obviously would be, quite, separate from your core area of expertise. So
that's how I think about it. I think it's okay to have other interests, but I think in investment, I think you want to make some sort of cross some actual milestones. And I think it's better when it's sort of connected in some way to what you've been doing.
Right. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's good food for thought for everyone listening to really take a minute and consider, what are you doing right now? And that's great, potentially what you're doing, but, take a few kind of steps forward and think about where do you want to be in the next few years, and where will your clients be, and where will they want to be, and can you, how can you position yourself and take kind of a strategic position now and make that investment like Steve is suggesting, so that you're not trying to just, stay kind of abreast of everything going on, but you'll actually be one of the leaders, one of the people at the forefront that your clients can call on confidently and really position yourself as someone, at the top of their game. So, Steve, thanks for sharing that. And really appreciate, your time and doing this interview.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Are you ready to take your consulting business to the next level? Learn more about the Accelerator Coaching Program at consultingsuccess.com.